2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
The space race started in 1955 as an effort made by the United States of America and the USSR, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, to display national superiority and demonstrate their technological accomplishments. These two economic and political powerhouses used this opportunity to strengthen their military forces and speed up their aerospace development to get ahead of the other. During this pivotal period in history, Valentina Tereshkova took the initiative and, in being chosen by the Soviet authorities, broke the gender barrier keeping women from physically and mentally demanding professions. Tereshkova served as a starting point for the rest of the world to close the gap of gender inequality, although the Soviet Union stopped sending women into space after that. The Soviet launch of the Sputnik 1 not only gave the Soviets a head start in the race, but also served as a blow to American prestige, since the Americans were astonished to learn that they were lagging behind in terms of missile and rocket technology.
Participation was to be scientific and as non-competitive as most purely scientific endeavors can be expected to be. In other words, it was decided that there was not going to be a space race. The Russians obviously decided differently at that time,
said former NASA telecommunications expert Eberhard Rechstein in his article Why Race for Space.
Many Americans were opting for the United States to just focus on the scientific part of the space race, without the political part being added to it.
Adds Ronald Dole, associate professor of history at Florida State University. At the height of the space race, the Soviet Union made a critical decision to take their competition to another level by sending someone unexpected into space. The multiple gender barriers Valentina Tereshkova faced were a driving force behind her pursuit of the title of being the first cosmonaut in space. Valentina Tereshkova was born on March 6, 1937, in a village in western Russia. Both of her parents worked at a collective farm, and her father was killed during World War II, leaving the world as a Russian hero. Valentina was a professional parachutist before she got selected into the space program. She made her first jump on May 21, 1959, at the age of 22, while still keeping her parachuting passion a secret from family and friends. Tereshkova also joined the Communist Youth League as a secretary and soon became a member of the Communist Party in 1962. Valentina had to overcome conflicts before, during, and even after her space career. During her training to earn her desired title, Valentina had to mention that all spaceflight hardware, including spacesuits and spacecraft comfort assuring systems, were designed mostly by men and for men. In this heavily male-dominated industry, she was quick to note that the gender barrier was indeed strong and very obvious indeed. Sending women into space was always a matter to be addressed but was never formally acknowledged. In fact, a study made in 1959 by Mercury 13, a former female space program started by NASA, found that women had more promising results than men in isolation tests and had better cardiovascular health, making them better suited for the space program's rigorous training and strict health requirements. Despite these positive results, the United States did not put further efforts into sending women into space.
We have no present plans to employ women on space flights because of the degree of scientific and flight training and the physical characteristics which are required,
said O.B. Lloyd Jr., director of NASA's Public Services Department. The three pillars of exemplary women in post-war society were the good worker, the good citizen, and the whole woman who is maternal, loving, and attentive to home, according to Natasha in her book, Angels in the Home and at Work.
In the 1920s in Russia, there was a belief that women were important as workers, but then in the 1930s, under Stalin, there began to have more of a shift as the importance of women as mothers and nurturers,
says Megan Armnecht, doctoral candidate at the Princeton University's Department of History. Americans, however, were far more attuned to women's fundamental needs than communism.
The emphasis for the United States was on safety. What if they had sent the first female into space and she got killed in the process? Sending a woman into space, therefore, was not their first priority. It was mainly just to put humans into space.
says Ronald Dole, professor at the University of Florida. But the United States had actually already silently hired women to work more behind-the-scenes jobs, such as the infamous Hidden Figures ladies, who were hired in the late 1950s. But the country's silence about it portrayed them as a nation who was afraid to make their barrier-breaking public.
Under no circumstances can one allow that the first woman in space becomes an American. This would hurt the patriotic feelings of Soviet women,
Writes Nikolai Kamenin in his diary, the director of cosmonaut training. The basic standards for women to apply for the space program were that the potential cosmonaut was a parachutist under 30 years of age, less than 170 centimeters in height, and no more than 70 kilograms in weight. Valentina Tereshkova was one of the finalists, along with 4 other applicants, due to her physical qualifications and her dad's legacies as a Russian war hero. In May of 1963, Kamenin announced that Valentina Tereshkova would be the pilot of Vostok 6 and called her Gagarin in a skirt, glorifying her Gagarin-level potential. On the spacecraft, Valentina marveled over the Earth as
a planet at once so beautiful and so fragile. Everyone,
she says,
Americans, Asians, everyone who has seen it says the same thing. How unbelievably beautiful the Earth is and how very important it is to look after it. Our planet suffers from human activity, from fires, from war. We have to preserve it.
Through her flight in space, Valentina Tereshkova grew concerned about the Earth's danger from potential disasters, such as asteroids. She remarked,
People shouldn't waste money on wars, but come together to discuss how to defend a world from threats like asteroids coming from outer space.
Valentina Tereshkova's flight changed the rest of the world's perspective on Russian women, who were once regarded as graceless, shapeless, and sexless. Female scientists in Russia signified evidence that the Soviets were tougher, more driven, and more devoted to their nation than their spike-heeled American counterparts. America's Cold War battle was not with a primitive adversary who treated its women badly and dressed them even worse, but with an opponent who tapped its talent in ways that strengthened the nation. The United States, on the other hand, reacted defensively to hide their remorse for not beating the Soviets in this aspect. An identified NASA spokesman told the press that the thought of a woman in space made him sick to his stomach. A large percentage of Americans believe that the Soviets' act of launching Valentina into space was a propaganda gimmick. General Leighton Davis, commander of the Air Force Missile Test Center, dismissed the flight as merely a publicity stunt. Claire Booth Luce, American author and politician, however, rebutted that communism was centered upon equality for all genders, and that America could have sent their first woman into space by simply deciding to do so. Although the Americans might not have been willing to admit it, Mrs. Luce's statement infers that Valentina's flight was treated as a win on the Soviets' end for at least some Americans. Subsequently, NASA's team of women started to grow tremendously in the years following Valentina's flight, a way for the United States to react to their opponent's victory. Although most Russians praise Valentina for orbiting over the sex barrier, not all cosmonauts approved of Valentina's performance in space and blamed her gender for it. Throughout her spaceflight, Valentina told the control she felt fine, but it was obvious that she was trying to hide her exhaustion. The Soviet Union made petty complaints about her professionalism by pointing out that she handed out her tube space rations to the public, which was strictly against Soviet protocol.
No more bitches in space,
said Pavlovich Korolev, lead Soviet engineer, when Tereshkova returned to Earth. When Korolev died in 1966, 3 years after Valentina's flight, 2 famed cosmonauts also died within 2 consecutive years. Another cosmonaut, Vladimir Komarov, was brought back to Earth after an unsuccessful flight, and Yuri Gagarin died during a routine training flight. These incidents put the entire space program on hold, and the space female unit got dismissed in 1969. Kamenin, having failed to get his female space squad off the ground, was forced to retire in 1971. Although Russia would not send another woman into space for another 19 years, Valentina Tereshkova was a pioneer of a significant women's movement starting from the Cold War time period, as she led other women into pursuing physically and mentally demanding professions.